So Hoover's just a name, and I think it was in an earlier section, and this should be lesson 3. I will change that. Hoover was president when the stock market crashed. So we'll just go from there. So this is your week at a glance. Oh, I forgot to type that in the title line. So once again, the organizer, and I'm just going to show Trevor because he's here, and I'll show you after class. But if you click on that, that's going to open up the review sheet, which I've told I think you know that it's optional.
And I can fill it.
But you can fill it out if you want. You just make a copy for yourself and you can fill that out, and it'll help you on the test.
Okay.
And you don't have to fill out everything, but you'll still get credit if you fill some of it out, and then it'll help you when you're taking the test. Because the test is open note, open book.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And that won't be until next week.
Okay.
And then the Ed puzzle is also linked there. And then I haven't started working on the Chapter 10 review, but that's okay. You guys, I'm sure, are still working on the Chapter 9 and the puzzle. So, okay. So, in 2007, U.S. News and World Report, they do a lot of lists. They rank like colleges and things like that. Well, one of the things they did was rank presidents, and Herbert Hoover was ranked number 9 worst. Because had he reacted differently, the Depression might not have gotten as bad as it did. So we're going to talk about some of the things that happened during his presidency to make it like it was. I know there's a lot of words there.
Wait, so this our notes or whatever?
Yeah, and you can use this. Yeah, Trevor just asked, can we use this for our notes? Yes, absolutely. You have access to all the slideshows. I'll show you after class.
Okay.
And a lot of the answers for that review sheet you're going to be able to find in the slideshows. So, and then I also have a book you can use today if you want. So, and Olin, tomorrow when you come in, if you do want to fill out that sheet, I also have a book you could use, which I know sometimes makes it easier than having to use that online book that's there. So after the stock market crash, basically, you guys can see this. He said the fundamental business of the country is on a sound and prosperous basis. This was the day after the stock market crash. It wasn't. And just a few months later, about 6 months later, he told the press that the worst effects of the crash upon unemployment will have passed in the next 60 days. They didn't. Unemployment climbed for a while till it got to 25%. That's 1 in 4 people were out of a job. So he was very wrong. And he was trying to tell the nation that things were good, and they weren't.
So wasn't like the percentage don't they have like a person for that? Like telling the percentage to them? Like
yeah. Oh geez. I'll have to call her back. Trevor asked, isn't there somebody like figuring out the percentages? And there were, but he was telling the nation lies kind of. Because he wanted to make himself look better. And he wanted to, and that's not completely the whole story. He wanted people to feel better. So by saying that, he was hoping that it would encourage people. The problem was he was not telling the truth. So it was a huge problem.
So was the election in 1929 like the same way as now?
No.
Oh, I was going to say, like, because couldn't they like tell like what he would do if he was the president before?
Yeah, no, and he was elected in 1928 in the midst of the Roaring 20s. So things were really good when Hoover was elected. And he didn't go up for re-election until 1932. And by then, the country was in the Deep Depression at that point. And we'll talk about that because we're going to talk about Roosevelt in the next chapter. Roosevelt beat Hoover, and we'll talk about what Roosevelt did then. But that's next. Okay. So Hoover believed in this. You might see these words come up in the test. Hoover believed in Americans' rugged individualism would keep the economy moving. So basically, he thought Americans were hardworking. They owned their own businesses. They owned their own farms. Americans were hardworking people. They had just fought a war that they were going to come back for it. The problem was the Depression was so bad that people couldn't come back from it without help. So one of the things he did was a public works project, and we'll talk more about that because Roosevelt did that too. Public works just means he put into place like, well, let's put some people to work by building roads. Let's put some people to work by building government buildings. Can you guys see any problems with that? Where does the money come from to build things like that?
The government.
Where does government money come from?
The people.
The people through taxes, right? So in order to do these things, he had to raise taxes. But the problem was there wasn't as many taxes coming in because people were unemployed. So that kind of didn't work. And he also didn't want to, we were not in debt as a nation at that point, not as we are now. And he didn't want to borrow money because he was worried that then banks won't be able to loan people money. He realized by 1932 that something needed to be done from the government. So he signed the Emergency Relief and Construction Act, which you guys don't have to memorize that. And it provided aid in the form of emergency loans. But by then it was too late because, I'll show you the next slide, the farmers were already in deep, deep trouble. So let me just show you, there's a cartoon here. So that's Hoover talking to a farmer. It says, it may not be perfect, but it'll still help quite a bit. So I know this is small for you, Olin, but you can always, this is in your book too, so you can go back to it if you want to. And I did link it, but I'm not sure if the link will work for you guys. So after World War I, American farmers were producing more than could be sold. So after World War I, production was up during World War I because we're trying to feed our people in America and then trying to feed soldiers overseas. And I don't know if you guys know anything about agriculture, but when you're producing too many goods, the prices of things like corn and wheat, it's going to go down. So the farmers in the Roaring 20s were already hurting. They weren't as prosperous as the people in the cities had been. Hoover opposed direct subsidies to support farmers, which farmers actually do get some subsidies even to this day. They called for the Federal Farm Board to loan money to farmers, but the problem was they couldn't pay back their loans because they couldn't sell their crops. So a loan wasn't going to help them. The comment that he's saying here, Hoover's comment to the farmer reflects the fact that the farmer may not be getting the subsidy he wanted, but that the Federal Farm Board would try and help. Okay, and then this just talks a little bit about the cartoon itself. But the important part is just understanding that Hoover thought he was helping, but he wasn't really helping that much. Okay, I didn't want to do that. All right, so the hunger marches and farm protests. So when people are angry, they protest. So people got mad at what was going on, and they actually went to DC. And I have a picture on the next page, or a map I'll show you guys. So hunger marches were actually taking place in DC. People were protesting at our nation's capital to say, you need to feed us. Farmers needed money. Milk prices went down. Seed prices were expensive. And milk prices are still low in this country. They've always been low. The price of milk hasn't changed for 25 years, which there's something wrong with that when you think about how everything else gets more expensive. So it started way back then. The farmers were hurting before the Depression, and the Dust Bowl, which you guys will see when you watch the video, combined with making too many crops, had caused the prices to drop, and many farmers lost homes and farms through foreclosure. And a foreclosure is just what happens when the bank says you haven't paid your loan, we're gonna take over your land. So the banks were foreclosing on homes because the banks didn't have any money either. So and foreclosures still happen today, obviously. And then this is just a picture. So the Bonus Army was actually a group of veterans who marched on Washington to gain support for a bill that would authorize early bonuses for World War I veterans. So those people that had fought in World War I were told that they would get a bonus, I think, when they retired. They marched on the Capitol and said, hey, we really are struggling. Can we get those bonuses early? The president said no, and it turned into violent protest. So here you see police going after veterans. Think about what that would do nowadays. If you saw a bunch of police like getting into a violent protest with veterans, people were very, very angry. And I'll just show you this graphic. Make this bigger. So
Is that like where they marched?
yeah, so this is where they marched. Staging point, Camp Glass for the site where veterans clashed with the police. 2 people were killed when the police actually opened up fire on the crowd. It was eventually evacuated by the Army. The Red Camp, the site of the second evacuation of veterans, many of the communists that made up this camp had fled before the Army arrived. So it's called the Red Camp because there were some communists there. Well, don't worry about that. You don't need to know that necessarily. It's just something interesting. And then they finally moved over the Anacostia River to where 7,000 veterans and their families had been camping. The Army actually came in, cleared the area, burned it down. So how do you think the people would react to that as a nation?
Like angry, obviously, but like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the veterans were angry, but it also made just the common person, when they found out about that, when they saw it in the newspapers, heard about it on the radio, people were pissed. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. People were extremely angry that this was happening to our veterans that had fought in World War I. And remember, back during this time period, almost every small town across the nation had had sent boys to fight in World War I, and many of them didn't come back. And then here's our federal government, our president, sending our own troops against our veterans. That wasn't going to end well. And that was, that was in 1932. So this was also an election year. And that's it for that one. But just know this was the beginning of the end for Hoover. I mean, it had been going downhill for a long time. The election was coming up. There's no way he's going to be president again. So this is just kind of showing you that things went from bad to worse in our nation during the Depression. And then starting tomorrow and then next week, we're going to talk about FDR, about Roosevelt's response. And it eventually got better. You guys know that eventually our nation came out of the Depression. Our nation generally does. I'm going to escape from here a little bit. Well, actually, I'll go to that next one. So we'll talk about that next week. And we can talk about, too, like in 2008, this was when you guys were pretty little. When were you born, Trevor?
2004.
2004, so you're only 4. But there was a depression that hit America in 2004, or in 2008, that it wasn't as bad as this depression. Our economy's stronger, but a lot of people lost their jobs, houses, the housing market crashed. But we came out of it. So that's just a trend. And when you take econ, that's something we'll talk about a little bit. So any questions? Okay. And then the Ed puzzle is also linked here. It's linked at the beginning and it's linked here.